Hey everyone, today I'm going to talk about emotions and our conflict management. So, all this term, we have been adding a lot of layers to our conflict management cake or adding new tools to your toolbox. And when we talk about emotions, we really want to see how it's really interlinked into all these different things we've been already developing awareness around. And emotions are, well, I just feel like this topic is so complicated. It can't be covered very quickly because it includes linguistics, it includes psychology, it includes neuroscience, it includes sociology. And here we are in a communication class where we're developing our leadership abilities, which I feel like understanding emotions, either how to emotionally regulate and understanding what activates you, or how to navigate someone else in an activated place so you don't escalate the conflict, but can move into a de escalation. And what are those tools we're using to de escalate? And a lot of that is going to be how we know how to become self aware. And part of self awareness is to be able to articulate your own experience in a way that doesn't create hierarchies with someone else's experience. You want to be able to articulate your own experience in a way that it can be supportive and allows for space for other perceptions, and that we can begin a negotiation type of conversation around how we attach meaning to different experiences. So if we took a simple, well, nothing is simple, but if we took the idea of a supervisor needing to give feedback to a subordinate in a team, which has to happen often, and we find people in who are put in supervisorial or management positions that have not a lot of self-awareness, or they're used to finding ways to avoid conflict, and that's how they were able to move up the ladder of their workplace. But then they kind of hit a wall when all of a sudden they're the ones that have to manage the conflict in the group and become the point of management. So when we think about emotions, we want to think about this idea of self-awareness so you can be a better leader, so you can self-regulate and become self-aware. So to start that, we're going to talk about the triangle of meaning and semiotics, which I think linguistics is a great place to start, because whenever we talk about emotions, emotions often get generalized, and they often are just a reduction. I'm just going to reduce this complicated experience that I'm having into this one word. I'm outraged. I'm I have anxiety. I am afraid, right? I'm terrified. And these words are valid words, but they often are reductions. And so understanding the linguistics around emotions can help us to better articulate for ourselves in our intra conflicts, and it can help us articulate outward, so then we can begin to create narratives, shared narratives, and interpret meanings. So the triangle of meaning, and you can look up triangle of meaning semiotics and see a googly image. I'm sure there'll be a lot of them, but basically it's a triangle. And Ogden and Richards created the triangle for us to kind of understand how symbols are connected to arbitrarily, their arbitrary relationship to what they refer to. So whether that is an image, but in this case, we're really talking about language, as the symbols, because symbol language is made up of symbols, and symbols have no meaning. Meaning comes from us, not from the symbols. So the relationship to the other parts of the triangle are how we're creating the meaning. So at the bottom of the triangle, we might have the word, and then a dash line to the referent, which is the actual thing that the symbols are referring to. And then at the top of the triangle, which is where meaning is, that's where we are. We are the ones that are interacting with the symbol, interacting with the referent, and creating a bridge, and that's where we have meaning. Whether we can create a denotative meaning, which is a very kind of structured, objective meaning, or we create where we have connotative meaning, where our own personal emotions and experiences create a layer of meaning. So, for example, the word cat, C-A-T, here on this side of the triangle really it's just a word. Now, the reference to that, if we went out and we had a field trip, we'd all meet and we have a cat and we all sit around and we say, this is the referent, here is the cat. And we all vote that these letters are going to refer to this creature here. And that we say that relationship is arbitrary because this really has no relationship to this. It's only us at the top of the triangle that is bridging and creating meaning. Now, the connotative meaning would be the meaning that some of you, when I say cat, are like, oh my goodness, I love cats, cats, right? And some of you are like, no. Or maybe they don't like cats, they're allergic to cats, and they have a different emotional response when they hear that word. So when we think of that connotative piece to an experience, we want to think about how that activates our emotional response. And language is doing that all the time. As we walk around in the world, there are all of these things that can activate our sympathetic nervous system to have an emotional response, or a parasympathetic system that activates an emotional response. So the sympathetic is not sympathy, that even though the word sounds similar. Sympathetic system is a physiological neuro system that is basically at arousal, meaning that we will get an increased heart rate, we have more alertness, we move into a place of energy. We're activated into an energy system. And that's the fight or flight, flight, and freeze too, as we gather more sensory information to decide, are we going to fight or flight, right? Run or fight. We often freeze first. And that's part of the sympathetic system. The parasympathetic system is part of our nervous system that is called the rest and digest system. And it is the place where we feel a sense of calmness. Now, for most of you, there are places where you can activate your parasympathetic system, and you can be in a place of rest. You can feel calm, you can breathe. And usually in that, there is some feeling of predictability. I know this. I know what's going to happen. I'm not confused. I can take a deep breath. I can enjoy this moment, or I can let this go because I have a place of predictability, and I know this. When we are faced with things with uncertainty or unknown, we often are moved into our sympathetic system. Maybe it is just like, here's an example, like the first day of class, Canvas goes live and you're in that sympathetic system. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know this teacher. What are the assignments? I signed up for this. I paid a lot of money for this class, but what's going to happen? And you are in a place that is activated, and your sensory systems are heightened as you click through the Canvas page or you listen to the first lecture and you're getting to know the professor and you're like, okay, I know what's going to happen. Whew. I feel like I can kind of move back a little and just ride this wave of this class. Some people like that feeling of the energy of uncertainty or unknown, and they go into it craving the emotional response to that. Oh, where others find that have different levels of sensitivity where that can activate a lot more of a fear and anxiety or panic even feeling. So when we're in the triangle of meaning, words like cat or tree or glasses, when we have a tangible referent for what we're talking about, then we often don't have as much conflict around that or need to negotiate, or the negotiation around language has less salience, less interpersonal kind of impact on our emotive response. But then there's other things that we might have a stronger emotional response to, and it could be just one word, or it can be when our sensories take in a certain experience, we will move into a more sympathetic, activated state. I grew up in California. Any other Calis out there with earthquake? Grew up around earthquakes. I live in Oregon now, but if a plane goes over, one of the kind of Air Force planes, for sometimes they do them above football games and things like that. There's a flyover, and I might be at home and my table starts shaking and things like that. I move into sympathetic. I take in the senses. I watch things shake. I hear a loud noise, and I can dive under my desk in no time flat. My sympathetic system takes over, right? And I'm activated into that, a response. Now, I use that as an example, the first day of class, or a sound, because it can come not from sound or our sensory awareness of what's happening around us. When we're in certain relationship situations or conflict situations and conversations, we often don't know what will activate someone into a more defensive, sympathetic, where their sympathetic system pulls them into a defense attack kind of mode, or where they might shut down and move into stonewalling or exiting. Those things are all going to be things that we don't always know. Now, the people we know best, we might have learned that over time, and we might already know how to maneuver through that conversations, but often we're not always aware of what's happening with the other person. And that's why we do perception checking, and why we talked about that as a tool in our toolbox. We're adding layers of intercultural communication so we can allow for different communication styles or processes, so we can move into this place of negotiating meaning. So when we're in a conflict and we're using language, and I want to specifically talk about emotions, we want to be able to do a body scan and take in our own experience so that we can put a name to what we're feeling. And that is part of what emotional intelligence means. That's part of what it means to be in an emotional, regulated place. Or when we think of someone who has a poker face, or practices stoicism and can move through a conflict in this kind of even way, we want to think that that's different than stonewalling. Stonewalling is a complete exit or shut down. That is different than being an active listener and regulating. And that can only happen with an acknowledgement and being able to articulate your own emotional experience. Now, most of us are detached. We have been ripped from our emotional, being able to articulate our emotional experience. Very few of us grew up in homes where when we were having a tantrum, someone sat down and made us a hot beverage and said, "Tell me how you're feeling. Let's see if we can find a way to talk about this," right? Usually as kids, we're either so flooded or we're dealing with adults that are also having an emotional reaction to our emotional reaction, and things escalate. And of course, the one with the most power wins in those situations. And so we have not really learned, most of us have not really learned how to articulate the experience that we're having. Though some of us have grown up around in situations where they were allowed to articulate it and validated, for whether when we felt angry, or when we felt grief or sadness, or when we feel joy. Kids can be like having all these other experiences, and parents come in from the day and they're holding their emotional baggage from the day, and it gets put out into the home, and kids often have to be the followers of the power of the people with the most power and their emotions coming first. And that's why I put up the Mr. Rogers video when he talks about his experience and how he was able to see the connection and allowed for the kid to have a voice of creating an interpretation of that event and taking ownership over it. But that's what I mean. Like when Mr. Rogers talks about, I got home and I felt bad for the way I acted, that he was in a place of self-awareness and he could create language and meaning. And then he engaged the child in the conversation and then was able to articulate the meaning of what was happening with the other narrative, right? A shared narrative means that the narratives are coming together to create one kind of understanding of experience. So in the triangle of meaning, that's a linguistic semiotics, and we use that for linguistics, and that helps us start to understand what is happening when we have conflicts. Whatever we're putting here in the language piece, the referent is we're trying to negotiate the meaning of what the referent is. Whether it's, I only want productive, successful people on my team. Well, okay, you've said that, but what is the referent of what does that look like? For some workplaces, it looks like, look busy, you're coming into work, you're in the office, and we have a lot of meetings and right? Okay. So for some, that's what the referent would be. Well, some people now say, well, now that I've worked at home, I understand that my success and productivity was not being in the office, that actually when I was home, I was able to focus more. All those meetings were getting in the way of my productivity. And I think I would like to work from home. Okay, so now we're in a conversation about the referent of what the referent is to this idea of what does it mean to be successful and productive at work on your job. Okay, so hopefully I'm kind of clarifying how this arbitrary relation between this and how we're creating meaning in our conversations, whether it's this idea of a love language, what I'll put here for how I think of what love is. And can we line that up? Like, it gets very exciting in our romantic relationships when we find someone who what they want to put in the referent for love is similar to what I think of that as love too. Oh my God, we match. We both think of that's what is love, right? But then time happens and all sorts of other things, right? So we have to constantly renegotiate that. On our Canvas page this week, I put up a couple of different, I have my handout, which I want to talk about anger in particular, but I also, in the actually vocabulary handout, I also put up a handout from Brené Brown's website from Atlas of the Heart, which you could Google this image too, but I downloaded and posted it, that this is a list of words that go to emotions and experiences. And I like this one because Brené Brown artfully says, when life is good, and then it has a bunch of emotional words, or places we go with others, where we fall short, things don't go as planned. And then there's all of these words. And just like the Gottman Institute image I put up of the anger iceberg, we could do this for all different types of words, but we always want to be expanding our vocabulary of emotions. That is one of the most important tools in your toolbox of conflict management, is being able to use more different language and words for an experience that you're having. If you just rely on, I'm outraged, I'm scared. Not that those aren't valid, but they're like saying, I am this city, right? I'm New York City. I'm Los Angeles, right? I'm Portland. And a city is nuanced, and there's different neighborhoods, and there's it's made up of all these different people, and different people speaking different languages and different cultures, and a multicultural city that's just labeled, I'm this. We want to explore that a little more. We want to go into the language of that. So when you say, I am angry, that's the city. When you say, I'm outraged, now we're going into a particular neighborhood. Then I say, I'm worried. Okay, now maybe you've identified a building in that neighborhood. And then you say, I feel annoyed. Okay, now maybe we might be going to a floor in that building. Now you see, like, we want to think about how are we have the title and the subtitles and the subtitles, and we really want to get down to this piece. This is the nugget of how we're going to use language as a tool to interpret the meaning of a situation, and how we're going to be in a dialogue about that. And this is why we started with those layers of how do you take a break when you're flooded. Remember, flooded is that emotional experience where listening shuts down, we're in a heightened sympathetic state, and our heart rates are up. Some people, that means exiting. Some people, that means fusing. Whatever it is, depending on the situation and the person, that's the sympathetic state of survival, fight or flight. And we have to know how to take a break, become self-aware. We talked about self-soothing, where we start moving back into that parasympathetic state where, okay, I'm going to take time to do a body scan, to become self-aware and pull my heart rate back down. And there's lots of different physiological steps that we can do to pull ourselves into that space, and then move back into the conversation so we can have a dialogue to interpret meaning. So one of the things that often happens to us that becomes another point of sabotage in our ability to manage a conflict is that the families that we were raised in often regulated us to certain emotional groups. And so this is why sometimes in families there's siblings or and parents that each take on like this kind of their own emotional building in the neighborhood, and they don't share that emotion becomes kind of dominated by them. And so because of that, we often run into patterns that when we get activated, our sympathetic system gets activated into a situation that we are reacting to, we fall into a habit of withdrawal, a habit of drama, right? Or a habit of this. So we take in those senses, and our family experiences, or our youthful experiences can often have created patterns that are hard to shift out of. This also happens in past relationships. Maybe we had a past relationship with someone who was very emotionally demanding and very narcissistic, in that their experience was the dominant experience, and we were forced into the back seat of not being able to have agency or have our experiences acknowledged. And that's even joy or happiness that we learn to withdraw ourselves out of and become disconnected from being able to articulate. So then we get out of that relationship, we find someone new, and we're in there, and all of a sudden we start reenacting the same pattern of the previous relationship, even though this person is not doing the same thing. But we take in those sensories and we fall into that pattern. It's like, think of it like skiing down a hill, right? That's our emotional response to what's happening. And the snow and ice has become hardened. And we have a tendency, when we have that experience, to go down that path again and again. But the ice and snow are getting harder and more crystallized, and we kind of get jammed up in there, and it becomes more and more unhealthy and dangerous to keep following that same emotional activated reaction. So when we are able to, okay, so that's the second. I did family, past relationships. The third thing I wanted to talk about was how society creates stereotypes and expectations for emotions, and their labels and restrictions that are put on you. They're like these boundaries of, oh, you're a this, or you are this. And so when you do emotion, this is what it means. And we, unfortunately, movies and television shows often use emotion reductions to tell their stories faster or to use humor in ways. But what it does is that reduction, when attached to different groups of people, becomes the expectation of society, even if we are like, I am not my stereotype, I am myself. I want you to interact with me, not who you think I am, that I want to be decategorized out of it. Some people have their implicit biases are so intense, or they have few interactions or experiences with people that they've decided are in that category, that they reduce you to their stereotype, and it doesn't matter what you do, you get that label. And that is also another thing that we're dealing with emotions and conflict situations, when we have this kind of prophecy of what the other expectations that we're forced into. I have a lot more to say about all of these topics. The last one, that the way emotions are affecting us, is the way they're demonstrated on television. And when we look at our movies and TV, emotions, again, because they're reduced for the sake of story and storytelling, they're often also highlighters of emotions. So, like Friends, Malcolm Gladwell talks about this, and I love it that when he says, like, Friends, you can mute the whole episode. You don't need the sound on, you don't need captions, and you pretty much know what everyone is feeling. We know when Phoebe is perplexed. We know when Ross is feeling neglected. We know when Rachel feels sad. It's very clear because their nonverbals are matched to an emotional response, and they're hitting those notes in very clear ways, right? They're very, I will be angry, I will be sad, I will be happy, I will be upset. And they're in these kind of reduction moments. But that's not the way real life works. So it has a cathartic purpose that's really important, because we often don't have the ability to be outraged and angry, and we can't, yell at someone we care about. Maybe we don't want to, but we use story and media as a way to watch someone else do it, so we can have that cathartic experience and release it through the mirroring. We have a neuro experience of mirroring that has us feel the same experience. And that's, as we go into Halloween, why we kind of play around with horror genres and fear or action thrillers. And it's so we can get that feeling of fear in a safe way, because we definitely don't want to feel it for real. But so we use stories and media as a vehicle for feeling emotions cathartically. So the sympathetic, so all of that is to say that when you're in an interaction, we have all of these things that we're dealing with, of expectations of others, our own patterns that may have gotten dysfunctional, our the way that we see emotions played out around us, that we are trying to navigate when we're trying to manage a conflict. So this is why activating your parasympathetic system, knowing how to move into places of being well regulated, is really valuable to you. And that means that you have to know what activates you. What are those things that you just like, right? I can't stand by any longer. I have to say something. And knowing those, and knowing the appropriate way to maneuver through that, so that you can actually have a functional dialogue. That's the goal. That's the dream. That's the dream right there. So the parasympathetic system is it's the rest and digest. There's different ways to activate that. There's, of course, meditation and different types of breathing exercises. You can look up dragon breathing, box breathing, but basically it's to move when you're focusing on your breath, even if your mind goes this way again, and then you have to bring your mind back, that when you have to bring your mind back to your breath, even if it wants to get sticky with whatever, I'm thinking about what I need at the grocery store, I'm thinking about what I should have really said in that interaction, let me tell you, right? Those are those sticky thoughts that come up, and then you move yourself back to your breath. That motion back to the breath is the work that you're doing. So then when you are in dialogue or interactions, you can bring yourself back to a place of listening and the interaction. Here you can stay focused on body scanning. How am I doing in this, and tracking that, and then having language to frame and interpret it is really important. Other ways, the parasympathetic system, one breath that you can do, I'll teach you one breath that I really appreciate from the Huberman Lab, is you can take a deep breath in, and then take another little tiny breath, hold it, and then slowly release it. And if you can really empty out your lungs all the way, that's really important, because when we're in a place of constriction with some emotional experiences, we forget to breathe, and the toxins build up in the lungs, in those little bronchial sacs. I'm not a physiology person, so I'll need someone else to step in for all the fun sciencey part of that. But those all that stuff that's building up, we want to get that out. So breathing in, taking a little more, and forcing that last little bit of air out. Really empties out those sacs. So we can make sure we're not just recycling some of the toxins in there that need to get out. So that's one breathing exercise. Of course, I said box breathing and dragon breathing can be really helpful as well, or just the skill of meditation is really working on that mind control, so you can be in an emotional regulated place, and you have, instead of the wave coming over you in an interaction, you can see the wave hit the beach and roll back out. That's what we want for you. We want you to be able to watch the wave, not get pulled under. Okay. Another thing about the parasympathetic system is it's really connected to our visual movements. So remember, part of activation is your eyes often get wider. We take in more information when we are experience a really activated state, and being able to do an extra long blink, moving your eyes in a more relaxed and deliberate way, and being aware of what you're looking at and looking up, which I'll just put in this side note, after teaching nonverbal for so many years, thinking about the eye roll and then understanding the neuroscience of eye movement, that looking up, and it, I always talked about eye rolls mean lots of things, but one thing is the way that we can exit, do a temporary exit and come back, that actually something is happening when we're looking up, which is why when you're taking a walk, looking around and really trying to look at different things, looking up into tree branches, look at the sky, look at clouds, or architecture. Architecture is another wonderful way to look up. You can think about some of your favorite architectural locations, whether it's a beautiful bridge, a skyscraper, or a cathedral, or a place of worship, how those places move your eye up. And that is one way that we're activated into calmer places. So I think it's really interesting, the science of the neuroscience of eye movement and how that can be connected to our emotional states. So all we're trying to do with this video is upskill you. I want to upskill you. I want to get you to the next level of conflict management and what it really means to be a leader, and having access to vocabulary, understanding all these different things that are kind of bombarding us into what emotions are expected or we've been patterned into, and then our sympathetic versus our parasympathetic system, and how to use those to your advantage and advantage, both of them, instead of letting the system take over without self-awareness. And that is emotional intelligence. That is emotional regulation. In fact, one of the things I do, like when I'm sitting at my desk, when I really have an activity that I've got to get done, I actually move and lean forward, and I'm much more intense and focused. And I know that activates my sympathetic system. When I'm talking with students or when I need to kind of take care of my emotional experience, I'll lean back in my chair and I'll activate myself in this kind of more relaxed position, because I know that will activate more of my parasympathetic and I can move into a more regulated place. And of course, the breathing as well. There's a lot more information about this. This is this video is probably longer than I wanted it to be, but I have a lot more to say. So if there's anything in here that you have questions about or you want more information, you can just drop me a line. I wouldn't mind talking to you about it, but I could also send you references of where I get my information so that you could look more into it yourself if you would like to. All right. I'm looking forward as we move through the second half of the term, where we are really keep developing our conflict management competency and upskilling you with more tools. I'll talk to you all later and have a good week. Bye-bye.